Pastor Tim Weber, many of us have known for a long time. He's been at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church. He's been our part-time pastor. He was, obviously, if you heard him preach last week, just a very dynamic pastor to listen to. He's also a clinical psychologist. He has done men's retreats, which have been great, and he's been an active part of our church. Today he's going to speak on fear and hatred, which obviously in our world right now, there's way too much of it. And one thing that many of you don't know about Pastor Tim is he's an accomplished sommelier of Iowa coffee, but that would take a whole nother hour to go into that. So I will pass this on to Pastor Tim Weber.
That's right, Kit. Your coffee. See, the reason Kit and I have that history is because his wife's sister, who lived in Decorah, Iowa, is the hometown for Misty, my wife, Luther College. And so Good Shepherd Lutheran was the church there. And so we'd go back to Decorah a lot. And the one thing that I couldn't find in Decorah was a good cup of coffee. And that's a little hard to believe, in that kind of setting. So I wound up at going to the Hotel Winneshek, which is I think Obama stayed in the Hotel Winneshek when he was there. I think we probably got his room too by mistake, but the only place I could find coffee was Winneshek, and I found out that the coffee they had at the Winneshek Hotel was Boyd's coffee. So that's the best it got at that time. I think they've upscaled since then. So anyway, Decorah is coming around. That's good news. Here's what I thought might be useful, and that is if I think combining a sort of you could call it a presentation and then a conversation, I think would be enriching and rewarding for all of us. So I want to talk about the roots of hate and the fruits of faith. If you want to put a title on it, it would be something like that. Want to spend a little time defining what hate is, talking a little bit about hate and its definition. Just one comment about hate in the Bible. Then talk about the roots of faith, the roots of hate, the consequences of hate, and then the response of faith to hate. All within probably 25 minutes. It's a little hard. As we're having this conversation, it would be useful if you could examine yourself, a good theological term. Examine yourself and ask yourself, where in your life have you experienced hate? However you define hate, where have you experienced that? Where have you experienced either one who hates or one who has been the recipient of hate? Also ask yourself, where does hate occur in your life right now? And there is a tendency to globalize hate, look at hate in the big picture, in the macro environment, the larger community, and so on. But on a weekly basis, day after day, I deal with hate within families and within marriages, within friendships, within work systems. So take a look at hate in your life as you experience it in the local as well as the global. But hate's something that permeates all our lives, from the smallest relationships to the largest experiences within the community. So take a look at hate wherever it might occur in your life. First of all, a brief commentary on hate. Hate is used very easily in our world. We hate broccoli. We hate Brussels sprouts. I'm speaking for myself. We may hate the Tennessee Titans, the game that Pastor Laura was at last week. We may hate the San Francisco 49ers. So Children may hate their parents at least for 10 minutes until they get their ice cream cone. So hate is thrown around in our culture willy-nilly. We use it to refer to both people as well as inanimate objects, as well as ideas, as well as political and social positions and so on. So hate is thrown around a lot, but I want to distinguish hate as something different than the continuum of, let's say, aversive feelings and impulses. Hate can be on a continuum of what I would call contempt. And last week's sermon really dealt with contemptuous convictions. And contempt is defined as some kind of superior position over someone else that is deemed inferior, with all the rights, privileges, and consequences of that. So a contemptuous relationship puts another person in an inferior position and demonizes that person, demeans them, degrades them, dismisses them, destroys them, annihilates them in some kind of way. Hate is different than anger. Anger is usually specifically related to things that people say and do, or organizations say and do. So anger is more situation specific. It tends to be more localized to a particular phenomenon or event, and does not have the kind of chronic duration that hate might have. Hate is more intense, it's more chronic, it's more based upon a kind of a very deep bias or prejudice against something or someone. And it often migrates towards some kind of revengeful act, hate crimes, revengeful act against another. So it has this kind of intensification. It's common to love somebody you're angry at, but it's very difficult or impossible to love someone that you hate. So anger is part and parcel of our ongoing experience, but hate takes it to another level. It's pernicious, malignant, cancerous, and deadly. And we experience the result of hate around the world on a continuous basis. Hate is used in the Bible frequently, 145 times in the Old Testament and 40 times in the New Testament. There's a different word for hate in the Bible, in Hebrew, the word sane, S-A-N-E, and in the New Testament, hate is miseo, M-I-S-E-O. Now, hate is also often used to describe God. It's an attribute of God. God hates, and God invites us to hate. What does God invite us to hate? Those things that are forces and factors that are related to social injustice, iniquity, unrighteousness. For instance, from Hebrews 1:9, you have loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your fellows. In Psalm 97:10, oh, you who love Jehovah, hate evil. We're also told in the New Testament to hate our family. Now, why is that, and what does that mean? Well, one of the things that happens within the culture of the biblical culture is that there are expressions that are often used to exaggerate and emphasize things. So strong words are used for emphasis. And that's the case with hate. And in this particular case, when we are invited to hate our parents, etc., the hate is related to loving less, not annihilating, loving less. So that's another meaning of hate within the biblical record, to love less. So we are told to, when we're told to hate our family, it means that we love our family less than the only one that should command our full devotion and full loyalty, which is God. So hate is often used to illuminate and emphasize a particular exaggerated position over against something else, whether it's loving it less or whether it's repelling it in a very aversive way. The statement in 1 John is right at the core of hate in terms of an aversion against a person. When hate is used in 1 John chapter 2, it is written that a man who hates is said to be walking in darkness as opposed to the light. We are called upon not to hate our brother, our sister. Obviously, it's that which is a form of killing Christ and diminishing the power of the cross. We talked about that last week. So contempt is the continuum, and hate is the point on the continuum that that is contempt on steroids. So that's just one word, one comment about hate within the Bible, and want to talk a little bit right now, again keeping in mind the time that we have, about the roots of hate. So what are the causes of hate? And I'm going to pitch about 6 or 7 causes of hate and then talk about the consequences of hate. So here are some of the causes. By the way, I want to make the point that there can be hot hate and cool hate. Hot hate is something that's very overt and expressed with very aggressive feelings and actions, but people can hate in a very cool way, where they're smiling, they're polite, but inside of them they have a disdain and an aversion and a contempt for the other person. So just because someone is cool doesn't mean hate isn't present. In fact, a lot of people live with cool hate instead of hot hate. And by the way, those people who live with cool hate tend to have a lot of physical illness and sickness, because hate just doesn't disappear. And as we'll talk about in a moment, it does damage to the body, mind, soul, and spirit. So there's hot hate and cool hate. So here are some of them. Oh, and then in our particular world, there's also a term that I want to use that's called controlled hate. So what is controlled hate? Some people would believe that we are innately people that need to express an aggressive kind of impulse against others, so we don't express it against our dear ones and ourselves. That's called projection. And controlled hate is the way our culture at least attempts to channel hate in a way that doesn't get out of hand. And the game that Pastor Laura went to last week is an example of controlled hate. Sports. I mean, when you talk about toxic tribalism, people who wear the shirts, the jerseys, the underwear, the socks, the cheers of a particular team, sometimes they hate the other team, but in kind of a mild, playful way. But other times it's not so playful. There's been a lot of destruction in the parking lots of stadiums around the country after games because people just can't stand another team, another city, another name. So sports is an example of controlled hate. Politics is another example, and other forms of what I called in the sermon last week, toxic tribalism. Tribalism is where people gather together in shared beliefs, but toxic tribalism is when those shared beliefs turn into blindness toward other beliefs and a kind of a blasting aggression toward others. So we are a culture that is permeated by toxic tribalism and variations of controlled hate. I'm going to talk about some uncontrolled hate here that goes beyond, that includes sports, politics, and other forms of toxic tribalism, but goes elsewhere. So what are some of the causes? First of all, loyalty. What are we loyal to? So sometimes hate is expressed toward different races, different groups, different ethnicities, different sexual orientations, different political groups, different social economic groups, different educational groups, different professions, etc. I'm talking about all that. So one of the causes of hate is loyalty. That people, we all come from a particular culture and a particular family of origin. And in our cultures and families of origin, there are certain values, certain positions, certain sacred codes, sacred covenants that we grew up with, and we really didn't question. They were just part and parcel of the culture. And whether we know it or not, for about 15 years, we're all born into a cult called the family. And we're all part of cultures that we're not even conscious of. But those narratives, those ways of behaving, those values within our culture and our families of origin just permeate our soul and our bones and our minds and our ideas to the point that we often grow into adulthood in an unquestioned way. Part of maturity is being able to sort out and discern what we're going to take with us and what we're going to leave behind. That's a project I do with a lot of students, which is called the sort of differentiation from the family and culture of origin. What are you going to take with you? What are you going to leave behind? But a lot of people move into adulthood kind of in an unquestioned way. And so there's this cultural and familial loyalty that we feel bound to, that we often repeat. Now, there's another form of loyalty called not the repetition loyalty, but the correction loyalty, and often it's an overcorrection. So if someone comes from a family of origin that had kind of a rigid, let's say a rigid religious devotion, a fundamental religious devotion, that sometimes people don't repeat what they're loyal to. They actually correct it, but they do it in an overcorrected way so that somebody grows up hating religion and any form of religion. So the loyalty can either be repetitive or it can be overcorrected. Nonetheless, those are flip sides of the same coin. It's an emotional reaction to the loyalty values within the family of origin, repeat or overcorrect. Okay. Another cause, point 2, which I would call ego enhancement. Ego enhancement means that hate, as Thich Nhat Hanh has written in his book on anger, hate fills us up against someone or something else. And when we are filled up with hate, actually from a neuropsychological perspective, it releases certain neurotransmitters that create energy, excitement, and in a strange way, happiness. There's been books written called On the Thrill of War. Hate actually, in a neurochemical way, enhances the kinds of things that our brain sometimes will translate into happiness. Excitement in the brain through the neurotransmitter of dopamine turns into sort of a happiness and an excitement. And some people, one author from Harvard, I think his name is Pearson, has talked about the addiction model to understand anxiety. And I would say there's an addiction model that helps us understand hate. And his point is that the reason people often don't get rid of anxiety and things like hate is because excitement in the brain, excitement is misunderstood as happiness. And you wouldn't use necessarily the word happiness, but some kind of elated or excited feeling that creates a well-being inside the individual. So reason number 2 is that hate is an ego enhancement against a person, over against the person that might struggle with low ego, a sense of helplessness, a sense of smallness, a sense of purposelessness, a sense of depression, anxiety, and so on. So ego enhancement. So we've got loyalty to culture of origin, family of origin, ego enhancement. Point number 3, what's another reason? Hate enhances group cohesiveness and creates what some writers have called pseudo-mutuality. For instance, in George Orwell's book, 1984, how did the culture form a sense of cohesiveness and togetherness? How did they form that cohesiveness? Well, there were fictitious wars on all the cameras and TVs. Wars were being created that really didn't exist, but the war was being created so that the culture itself could stand over against the enemy out there. And one person has written, Robert Elliott Gonzalez wrote, next to meeting somebody who admires someone we admire, we all like to meet somebody who hates someone we hate. And Anton Chekhov wrote, love, respect, friendship do not unite people as much as a common hatred for something. Just two examples. In a book called The Crime of Punishment by Karl Menninger, he made the case that the crime of punishment is not that we simply have criminals and that they are punished. He said the crime of punishment is that we need our penal system. And the reason we need our penal system, he said, is that we need people behind bars to look at in a superior way so we can say, thank God we are not like them. We need lesser groups, degraded groups, so we can look down at them, and in so doing, we can enhance our group cohesiveness, but it's not a true mutuality, it's a pseudo-mutuality. So group cohesiveness and pseudo-mutuality. So culture can reinforce hatred for that reason. Reason number, I think it's number 4. I'm losing count now, but I think it's reason number 4. It's called the fear antidote. Some of these are related to others, but the fear antidote, what's that? Thomas Merton said, the roots of violence is fear. The root of violence is fear. It's not anger, but anger is often rooted in fear. What do we fear? We often fear life. Ernst Becker, in his prize-winning book, on death, the denial of death, talked about that a kind of existential experience in life is fear. We fear a lot of things. We're in fact taught to fear. We fear our finitude. We fear our fragility. Right now, we fear the virus in all sorts of ways. Some people don't, but a lot of people do. But we fear things, and the gross national product of our country is often based on enhancing our security systems, our toothpaste, our medical devices, animals, security systems, things on our computers. We are taught to purchase and acquire all these things that are going to guard us against fear. One of the things that guards us against fear, just psychologically, is hate. Because when we fear, we shrink back and we're small. But as long as we can hate, we gain energy to put into action that is bigger than the fragility and smallness of our fear. Now, by the way, as I'm going through all these causes for hate, I'm not recommending this. I'm just trying to state what psychologists, sociologists, and philosophers have described as the roots of hate. Okay, next reason, and we have only a few more to go. The projection of the shadow. Carl Jung, contemporary with Freud, back in the early part of the 1900s, wrote about the shadow. And the shadow is the place that we put all those things in our lives that we fear, that are unwanted, that we don't like about ourselves. In fact, the things that we hate about ourselves. And sometimes they're very good things too, but we've been taught to put a lot of things into our shadow that we don't want to actually integrate into our public persona. So for instance, some people grew up in families where they were taught not to be weak. The only acceptable way is to be strong. So weakness would be in that person's shadow, something that was unacceptable and was not permitted. And so as that person grows up, weakness is in their shadow. So one of the things that gets a person triggered up in that particular case, gets them activated and gets them to hate are things and people who are weak. That's just one little example. Jesus and Freud agreed on one thing, and that is the power of projection. When we have something within us that we don't like, we will project it out onto other people and we will attack it. Jesus talked about the beam in our own eye and the splinter in the other's eye. Then there's the Pharisee and the publican in the temple. So projection of our shadow onto others in a way that puts others into a dismissed position is the art of the projection of the shadow. And Hermann Hesse, the poet, once wrote this: if you hate a person, you hate something in him that is a part of yourself. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us. And so one of the things we recommend to people is what's called use your intensity as a clue. Anything that you have a strong, intense aversion toward out there, ask yourself, we call reel it back in, ask yourself, what's the part of what I hate that is in me? And according to Hesse, it's always there. And if you don't see it, you just haven't looked hard enough. Okay, the next reason, displacement. Displacement has to do with, Freud talked about this as a defense mechanism, that we often find somebody to displace our anger toward that's similar to the one that we're really angry with. So for example, if some people have been abused by, let's say a father was a very abusive person growing up in the family. And so the father's daughter was abused over and over and over again. And the father's son was abused over and over again. It could be that these kids grow up hating men. And so they extrapolated their hatred toward their father onto other people. And one of the things that helps displacement is to work it out with the original people, not the surrogates who we displace it to. And just a little note on marriage or partnerships, that a lot of times people continue to work out their unfinished business with other surrogates, their spouse, their children, their friends. They work out unfinished business with surrogates instead of with the original people. And that tends to be sort of one of the standard defense mechanisms of humans. And it's part and parcel of the business I'm in. Okay, final reason, got to stop at some point here around the roots of hate. The final reason is hate. Get this. Hate may be a perverse form of intimacy. Hate may be a perverse form of intimacy. There's a saying, I think Pascal was the author of this particular saying, but he said there are people who love without measure and they hate without reason. Loving without measure and hating without reason. Because hate and love and passionate love have one thing in common. They're born out of passion. And sometimes the more passionate love is, the more one hates. Did you know that you are safer walking down the streets of New York City at 2 a.m. by yourself than you are living in your own home? Why? Because you're likely to be hurt or killed 4 to 5 more times by a friend or family member than you are by a stranger. Now think of that statistic. I mean, New York might want to use that as a part of their Chamber of Commerce. Why is that so? Why is that so? Often people hate because they want a passionate relationship, but they don't know how to attach well. So this whole notion of secure attachment or attachment theory is based on the idea of attaching well. When people don't know how to attach well, it's not that they don't want to attach, they just find hate as a way to do it. You know, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Indifference is the opposite of love. Hate and love are flip sides of the same coin of intense impulsivity toward the passionate intimacy. Okay, so those are the roots of hate. And there are more, but got to stop. So quickly, the consequences of hate. So 3 quotes. 1, Eldridge Cleaver. The price of hurting another human being is loving oneself less. Henry Emerson Fosdick, hating people is like burning down your own house to get rid of a rat. Coretta Scott King, hate is too great a burden to bear. It injures the hater more than it injures the hated. And one of my favorite quotes from Anne Lamott is, and I mentioned this to patients, hate is drinking rat poison and hoping the rat dies. Okay, if someone wants to conduct a suicidal mission, just get on the bandwagon of hate, because the one who suffers is the one who hates. The one who is hated also suffers, but the one who really suffers is the one who carries hate. Biologically, relationship-wise, physically, and relationally. The second consequence of hate is that people don't examine their own lives. We've heard it said by the philosophers that the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, people who have energy toward the outside are not examining the life that's on the inside. And when we project, we miss the opportunity to look at ourselves and work toward greater integrity, facing our own fears and our own brokenness. The third consequence of hate is social and familial dysfunction through hot and cool hate. I see so many families, for example, so many families. And David Brooks actually had an article in the New York Times on this about a month ago, where he talked about fractured families. But I see so many families where relationships have been cut off and they have not been repaired. And there is kind of a resignation that they'll never be repaired. Parents with children, siblings with siblings, parents or ex-spouses with ex-spouses. I've seen that over and over and over again, working with multiple families right now where that's the problem. The final consequence, the worst consequence of hate, is that we kill Jesus, or we try to. We nullify the cross. And I mentioned that last week in the sermon on contempt, that the cross was not only for us, it's because of us. The Hebrew word for salvation is spaciousness, and that includes inclusiveness, welcoming, a spirit of welcoming. The Hebrew word for Egypt means the narrow passage. So when we hate, we push people into a narrow passage of annihilation. When we love, we create spaciousness. So that's the challenge. And it's so impossible for us to do that, that the only way we can actually create the true spaciousness that the love of God calls us to is not by being the source of love, but by being the pipeline of love. I mentioned that last week too, because of our total inadequacy around love. Okay, finally, I'm going to stop in a moment here. Oh, by the way, I want to, before I just make a comment on the fruits of faith, which I just now did, I want to mention an interesting philosopher, Max Scheler. And Martin Marty referred to Max Scheler. Max Scheler's what he called three alasses. Three alasses. And here they are. When things are bad because of the evil in our life and our heritages, we can say, alas, what did our ancestors do? It's important to know that, but we can't change the past. Scheller's second alas is, alas, what have I done? But that too refers to an unchangeable past. The third one, however, looks to the personal, to the present, and to the future. Alas, what kind of person am I that I am capable of hating other people and other groups? That question, says Scheler, may lead to a change of heart and a better first year. And that question, the third alas, opens us up to the spirit that God invites us to welcome. So my last comment will be a comment on this. The change of heart comes about only through the power of the cross. the power of faith is the only power that can ultimately, hatred is not reduced by hatred. It can only be reduced by love. And the only love that we can utilize to reduce the power of hatred is the love of God, not our own love, which is inadequate. So our prayer over and over and over again in a change of heart is, Lord, Psalm 51, create a new heart within me. Look at that. Look who's the source of that heart. It's not ourselves. It's the Spirit of God who is the creator of the love that we have. And so we become instruments, St. Francis of Assisi. We become instruments and pipelines. We are not the source of that. So the prayer that we might be open to the love of God is a prayer that let's get out of God's way and let God work through us in order to dismantle the power of hatred. We live in a lethal culture. We live in the forces in the forces of this world, these principalities and powers that seek to dismantle and undo the creation. But that's not the end story. The resurrected yes of God is the yes that we need to cling to as we deal with ourselves and a world that is darkened by hatred. So it's good news. It's good news. And that's what I want to end on. And now we have time for discussion. Not as much as I would like, but sometime. So, Don.
Tim, would you go back over those alasses again? Alas, alas, that of the Schellers.
Sure, I can do that.
How does that look at the faith relationship connection to my hatred, my ability to hate?
Well, the cross first invites us to examine ourselves, and as Luther said, repentance is an everyday project, and when we say in baptism we need to drown and die with Christ and then rise with Christ. Drowning and dying means that we are examining the brokenness within ourselves. So the third alas is what kind of person, according to Scheller, what kind of person am I that I am capable of hating other people or groups? And that question, says Scheller, may lead to a change of heart. Unless we open ourselves to the brokenness within us, many people say this, not only those from the sacred community, but those quite secular folks, unless we open ourselves to the darkness within us, which is the invitation of the cross, we will not be capable of opening ourselves to the Spirit that's available to us. It is, Henry Nouwen said this, that it's only when I have an empty heart, an empty self, the kenosis of God, Philippians 2, it's only when I am empty that I can truly be filled with God, what God has to offer. And by the way, Misty handed me the note to make it very clear that the kind of love we're talking about, as when C.S. Lewis wrote about agape, philios, eros, and storge, the four kinds of loves. Storge is the love of parent to child, eros, passionate love, philios, friendship love, agape, suffering love. The kind of agape that God gives us all forms of love, but the kind of agape that really is God's surgical invasion. I mentioned, God does surgery on creation, not just outpatient Band-Aids. The surgical love of God is agape, suffering love. And that's the kind of love that our change of heart is open to, and that we can't manufacture ourselves. Suffering love does not come from our own laboratory.
Yeah. And the second to last, how does that one fit in?
Oh, the second to last is, so we're working backwards here.
I know. That's all right.
Yeah. The second one is, alas, what have I done?
Oh, okay.
And Scheller's point is that he says, but that too refers to an unchangeable past. A lot of people like to dwell in those things that have happened. A very important point here when it comes to hate is that you can ruminate about the past, you can agitate about the future, but the only way you can imaginate is in the present. You can ruminate about the past, you can agitate about the future, but the only way you can imaginate is in the present. And that's where the power of the Spirit is available to us. We imaginate. The cross brings about a spacious imagination. Think of the power of the gospel to do that. A spacious imagination, not agitation, not rumination, but imagination that's spacious. What a powerful gift.
Okay, ruminate the past. What's the second one?
We ruminate the past, we agitate about the future, and we imaginate the present. And imagination is about spaciousness. It fits beautifully with the Hebrew notion of salvation and the contemporary notion about creativity, which is this spaciousness. So I like the word imagination. If you read any of Walter Brueggemann's stuff, the Old Testament professor, if you read his stuff, he really talks about the imagination of the Old Testament and the Psalms and the poetry of the Old Testament, that the people of God are people who imaginate. We're not confined to the narrow passage and spreadsheets about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. We imaginate the spaciousness of God. So Brueggemann is a good resource on the poetic imagination of the gospel. Well, I'd refer you to, I mentioned this in the sermon, Braver Angels. If you take a look at Braver Angels on the website, there's a huge amount of resources there. It wasn't generated by a faith-based organization, but it has all the components of a faith-based organization. One of the things that the Braver Angels that actually was born after the 2016 election because of the polarization in our culture after that. One of the things that they really say, and actually, I have some patients. One was telling me the other day that if you want to put a major dent in bigotry, the most powerful way to put a dent in bigotry is to become familiar, to get to know the people behind the positions. So when she has been in various cultures, she said the assumptions that she brought into these cultures before she actually became familiar with the people were suddenly loosened and dismantled because she came to know them as people. So becoming familiar with the person and Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Righteous Mind, talks about this too. He says there's a lot of values. We know values of loving, values of tradition, values of service to society, and so on. He said the values are not the difference. It's what lies behind the values. How did you get to a particular position around this value that you interpreted in a certain way? And the only way you can know that is to get to know the person and their stories. So getting to know the person and their stories, becoming familiar with who that person is and how they got there. So one of the things in Braver Angels that happens, there's a 50-minute documentary about this. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. One of the things they do in their workshops is they spend time with inquiry and curiosity, trying to find out how people got to their positions that they got to, why it means so much to them. What are the roots of this? What's the story behind it? And these are powerful conversations and powerful opportunities to learn and to create. Again, it's a creation of spaciousness as opposed to the narrow passage of a fixed position And so, and that's actually what we do in all our family of origin consults when we bring families together for 13 hours over 3 days. It's the first time a family that's been around for decades gets together and they start to tell stories about themselves. And so that's some of the work we do with our what we call intensive family of origin conversations. It's getting to know people within your own family in ways that you've never known them before. So these are very powerful resources, the familiarity. And I think Jesus was a great example of one who spent time eating with people simply because it was the time to get to know them.
Well, I think that takes care of the hour that we've had. We want to thank Pastor Weber for sharing his expertise with us today and thoughts. And it's always fun listening to what he has to say. So thank you very much, Pastor Tim.
Okay, thank you for your collaboration.
And I would say have a good rest of the week. Go in peace.
Serve the Lord.
Serve the Lord.
Okay. Thanks be to God.
Bless you all. Thanks be to God.
Okay. So long.
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Thank you.